Alright, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mings, and it's time for a Patreon-sponsored spotlight. Yes, I still do these from time to time. Someone really wanted me to do a spotlight on Fear, and I was very happy to oblige them, because she is my ultimate guilty pleasure unit. She's a character that I should by all means dislike and call horrible, but for some reason, I just don't. I love using this unit. There's just something about Fear that makes her incredibly fun to train. So join me today as we take a look at another character from my favorite Fire Emblem game. Let's go.
I will be a master of the sword. You can count on that.
Once upon a time, in an arena in Ostia, a warrior walked up to a hot swordmaster and tried his best pickup line. Well, that didn't go so well. Let's try that again. Once upon a time, in an arena in Ostia, a warrior walked up to a hot swordmaster and tried his best pickup line. Oh dear. That's not how you're supposed to do it, Bartre. No. Let's try this one more time. Once upon a time, in an arena in Ostia, a warrior walked up to a hot swordmaster and tried his best pickup line, and it actually seemed to work this time, but then he forgot his weapon. Man, don't you just hate it when that happens? Okay, come on, let's try it one more time. Once upon a time, in an arena in Ostia, a warrior walked up to a woman and threatened her. And it worked. And he got laid. And that's the story of how Fear was born.
I hope to be every bit as good as my mother someday.
Fear is the daughter of Karla and Bartre. She grew up somewhere on the Sacaean plains. Her two parents often sparred and trained with each other in order to improve their skills, and didn't have much time to be normal parents. While Fear looked up to her father for his strength and bravery, it was her mother she idolized the most for her magnificent skills with a blade, and she wanted to become just like her. As a result, Fear practiced with the sword every day from a very young age, trying to match her mother's skills as best as she could, but it always felt to her like Karla was out of her reach. As Fear grew older, Karla got struck by an illness and showed no signs of getting better. Eventually, she died in her bed, and this had a profound impact on Fear. Not only did she lose her mother, but her role model as well. In an attempt to follow in Karla's footsteps, Fear made a decision to travel the world to hone her skills against opponents far and wide, much like Karla had done at her age. While Bartre tried his best to keep his daughter at home, Fear defied his wishes and went out in search of her destiny. In the events of Binding Blade, Fear's travels take her to Ostia, where she seeks out the gladiator arena in search of worthy opponents, completely oblivious to the massive rebellion going on there at the time. This leads her to confront Noah and challenge him to a fight. At first, Noah is amused by this, but after realizing just how inexperienced Fear is, he decides to coach her in swordplay instead. After a few lessons, she leaves, telling him that she's headed to the Western Isles, as she believes there will be strong opponents there for her to challenge. Though she also wants to go there for nostalgic reasons, as it is the place where her mother and father met for the first time. Staying true to her path, Fear travels to the Western Isles, but her naive and trusting nature gets the better of her and she gets caught up with the wrong crowd, as the pirate leader Scott fools her into thinking he represents the people of the island, and tells her that Roy and his army are actually a group of invading pirates. This enrages Fear, who rushes out to defend the people against what she perceives to be the bad guys, unaware that this is just a ploy concocted by Scott to get her killed, so he can get his hands on her famous family sword, the Wu Dao. Why Scott wouldn't just simply kill Fear and take the sword is a bit of a mystery, but who knows, maybe he's just a terrible judge of character and doesn't know just how weak Fear is. But then again, his henchman does state that she won't have a chance out there, so they're clearly aware of how inexperienced Fear is, but I don't know, just, he knows what he's doing, guys, he said so himself. Anyway, after charging out into battle, Fear runs into Noah, who tells her the truth about the pirates. Embarrassed that she was forced into fighting for the wrong guys, Fear switches sides and joins Roy's army, seeing it as an excellent opportunity to meet more strong opponents to hone her skills. Depending on the route the player picks, Fear may reunite with her father on the Western Isles, as she runs into Bartre leading a group of freedom fighters attempting to break some prisoners out of a castle. Overjoyed that he's finally found his daughter again, Bartre joins Roy's army to look after her, much to Fear's dismay, as she doesn't want to be constantly coddled and treated like a child. Fear also later runs into her uncle, Karel, the Sword Saint, hiding out in a remote village in Bern. She is surprised to meet him here after so many years, and even more surprised when he decides to join in her fight against the Manakites of the Dragon Temple. After the war, Fir continues to travel the world seeking out worthy opponents, and in time she becomes known as the new Sword Saint, her legends eventually rivaling or even surpassing that of both her mother and her uncle. Fir is incredibly naive and gullible. She is an absolute terrible judge of character and is unable to see through even the most blatant lie. This is mostly due to her young age, but it also shows a lack of parenting in her early life. Bartre and Karla were always busy training when Fir was growing up, as Bartre points out in their support conversation, and so there wasn't much time for them to teach Fir how to develop her social skills, which is why she's a little awkward in her interactions with other people. Due to this neglect, Fir chose to pursue the only thing that made sense to her, swordplay. She did receive some lessons from her mother. In particular, Karla taught Fir not to judge other people by their appearance, which is why Fir is so trusting towards Scott, despite him literally having bad guy written all over his face. This may either just go to show how much Fir idolizes her mother, taking her advice so literally that she chooses not to trust her better judgment, or it may just show how immature Fir really is. Due to how experienced she is when we first encounter her in the game, it can be assumed that she has not been traveling for very long. In fact, her initial appearance in the Ostian arena may reflect her very first weeks or even days in the outside world, so in essence she's little more than a child in terms of her accumulated experience. Just like her mother Karla pursued the sword to get closer to her brother Karel, Fir pursues the sword to live up to her mother's legacy, though it can also be speculated that the reason why Fir ran away was a bit of a coping mechanism to deal with her mother's loss. In fact, Bartre mentions this in his sea support with Karel. Due to this fact, most of Fir's supports center around her swordsmanship, except for her interactions with Noah, which shows how Fir deals with having a crush on a boy for the first time, and we can see how utterly clumsy she is, tripping over herself, stumbling her words, and just being a complete mess. Noah, of course, tries his best to find out what's wrong, but is met by Fir becoming even more flustered as she tries to sort out her emotions to little avail. In the end, Fir tells him to strictly stay away from her as he is too much of a distraction to her swordsmanship, but in their ace support, she admits that she simply cannot stop thinking about him, and in the end, Noah tells Fir that he loves her. We sadly never get a satisfying conclusion to this romance, as Binding Blade doesn't feature paired endings outside of Roy and his harem of girls. And Fir's ending never mentions her settling down or raising a family, so sadly it seems like this little love story never develops much, which is a little sad as Noah and Fir are very cute together. In Fir's supports with Bartre, we get some insight into her childhood, and also some clues regarding why she decided to run away from home. Bartre is the very definition of an overprotective dad, wanting to coddle Fir to the point where she can hardly breathe. But there's something more to Bartre than just wanting to keep his daughter safe. His action also displays a lot of remorse and regrets. Bartre clearly feels like he did an inadequate job as a father when Fir was little, and as a result he's trying to make up for lost time. Fir, of course, doesn't want her father constantly around her as she feels that will impede her progress, especially on the battlefield where Bartre is very likely to throw himself in front of any danger she may encounter. Still, we do actually learn that Fir doesn't think of Bartre as a poor father at all. In fact, she has many good memories of him cheering her up as a child, and genuinely looks back on her childhood with a lot of affection and warm memories. It's a very emotional and heartbreaking support that ends with Bartre crying, being proud of his daughter for growing into such a strong-willed woman, just like her mother. Fir's supports with Rutger are quite sad. Since he is a strong swordsman, Fir predictably gravitates towards him early on, hoping to learn from his skill, but she doesn't realize just how different their two paths are. To Fir, mastery of the sword is an art form, a way of life. But for Rutger, it is simply a means to obtain revenge. His sword is only used to kill, and so he refuses Fir's request to spar with him as he views that as just pointless play. In Rutger's mind, if he draws his sword against Fir, it will be to kill her, nothing else. Fir tries her best to understand Rutger as she wants to learn from him and adapt his style, but Rutger tells her that she should not try to emulate him, as his sword is soaked in blood, and that his path is not one that anyone should try and follow. Though the support ends with Fir telling him about Karel's famous quote that all paths of the sword leads to the same place, which is also something Karel tells Rutger directly in their support, implying that there might be some redemption for him yet. Fir's supports with Shin centers much on her Sacaean heritage. Karla being from the plains means Fir is half Sacaean, just like Rutger. Shin is obviously very proud of his heritage and his tribe, and asks Fir what tribe she hails from, which of course she doesn't know, as Karla and Bartre probably never told her. In fact, we have no idea where Karel and Karla came from at all, or if they even had a tribe, and since Karel killed their entire family in his mad quest for power, whoever they were, they're no longer alive when the support takes place. Shin also mentions that he is impressed by Fear, because Achaean women very rarely fight with swords. Yep, absolutely none of them over there swinging swords around. Anyway, this support ends with Shin admitting that he actually admires Fear and her carefree attitude. He likes that she isn't chained down by her heritage, and that she makes her own path in life. Lastly, Fear's supports with Karel is mostly her obsessing over his legendary status, and of course, how could she not? She's grown up on tales about his expertise. Karel quickly shuts her down, however, as he states that marveling over someone else's power is meaningless. Which of course there is some truth to. You don't improve yourself by simply admiring someone else. It ends with him giving Fear a valuable lesson, telling her to stop chasing after her mother and uncle to try and mimic their accomplishments, but rather that she should follow her own path, as every person has a unique journey to undertake. This advice may very well be the reason why Fear eventually ends up becoming the next Sword Saint. Fear's entire character arc is the archetypical pupil's journey, a young, innocent, and naive youth traveling the world in search of her destiny. She desperately tries to fill the impossibly large shoes of her predecessors, while at the same time being a regular young teenage girl, struggling with things like boys and understanding the ways of the cruel world. It's not hard to see why Fear's story have captivated fans all across the community.
I defend myself well with my sword, but you know, I never see a lie coming.
Fear's outfit is a combination of both her parents. Her outer jacket is similar in color to Karla's dress, while her undershirt is similar to Bartre's. In a popularity poll on the official Binding Blade website, Fear ranked as the 5th most popular character in the game. Fear shares her hero's voice actor, Natalie Lander, with Elise and Nina from Fates.
You know, I'm not really the sort that's good with teasing.
Fear becomes available to recruit in Chapter 9. She shows up on turn 2 as an enemy unit alongside Shin near the castle and will immediately start walking towards you. It is most common to first encounter her on the middle island, or on the bridge leading down to it, depending on how fast you play. Be careful as the map is Fog of War and Fear will attack you if she comes within range. She shouldn't pose a huge threat to you at this point, but she is liable to get herself killed if she attacks one of your stronger units. Use a torch to light the way so she doesn't take you by surprise, and then recruit her by talking to her with Noah. Fear joins as a level 1 Myrmidon with these bases, which are pretty bad for this stage of the game. Her survivability is absolutely awful, and she's likely to get one-shot by several enemies on the map. She does get hard mode bonuses, and they do help her out a lot, but even with these boosts, she still has a very shaky start. Compare her stats to that of Rutger, who joins 5 chapters earlier, and it's clear that she is by far the worst of the 2 Myrmidons. But it's not really fair to compare any character in Binding Blade to Rutger, as he is one of the best units in the game. At the end of the day, most people are already aware that Fear is a lot worse than Rutger, so that's not really going to be a point of discussion in the spotlight. But let's try to rate Fear on her own merits and take a look at what she can do in a vacuum, and let's see if there's actually any sense in training her. Fear's bases may be weak for her joining time, but they are pretty damn good for her level, and she has 39 more of them to grow on. Fear's skill, speed, and luck growths are all fantastic, albeit a little overkill, as she is likely to cap her speed before she even reaches level 10. Her strength growth, on the other hand, is really bad. 25% is just plain awful. With Fear, every level she gets is a 1 in 4 gamble that her damage output will increase, and most of the time you won't see that gamble pay off. She may be fast enough to double just about everything, but if her strength refuses to grow, she'll just be a frail sword-locked unit that can't kill stuff, and you already have one of those in your army. Luckily, Fear is helped out a tremendous amount by the sword she comes equipped with, the Wu Dao. It's not a personal weapon as it's locked to the Myrmidon class line, which means Rutger can use it too, but he shouldn't really need it at this stage of the game as he can get by just fine with a killing edge. For Fear, on the other hand, it is a very good thing that the Wu Dao exists, because with her D rank in swords, she's unable to use the killing edge at base, and she really needs that extra crit to kill enemies sometimes, as she won't do much damage with an iron sword at base level, and due to her awful constitution, you really don't want her anywhere near a steel sword. You should therefore use the Wu Dao to get some easy kills with Fear until her stats and weapon ranks start to increase. Don't hoard it, it's literally made for this purpose. So, speaking of purpose, what is really the purpose of a unit like Fear? Why bother training her when you got units like Rutger who may have earned their promotions at this stage of the game? Well, it's quite simple, really. If you are a player who takes great enjoyment in grinding up someone from 0 to hero, Fear is pretty much your wet dream. In most other Fire Emblem games, a unit joining this late with these bases would probably not work out that well. But the Western Isles is a treasure trove of experience opportunities for Fear. It's full of inaccurate axe users who will struggle to land hits on her, and she can kill them quite easily. In fact, in the very chapter Fear joins, you get pirate reinforcements from the forts from turn 12 to 20. Yes, some of these reinforcements have hand axes, but the rest of them she can reliably kill with next to no risk of death. In fact, here's a montage of me grinding Fear from level 1 to 14 on hard mode with no save states or RNG manipulation, and she doesn't even once get close to being killed. So, does this process take time? Yes, it takes a lot of time. Is it optimal for fast-paced LTC 0% haxer speedruns? Absolutely not. Do I advocate that just because you can grind a unit up this easily that she is somehow good? No, I wouldn't call Fear very good at all, judging her by the standards of most Fire Emblem units. However, my argument against training most low base, high growth rate units is that even when they do reach their potential, they don't really outperform your other units by that much, or at the very least, not by enough to warrant the slow and tedious grind. But with Fear, it's another story. Once you do grind her up and give her that sweet promotion, you will have a very strong unit on your hands. Swordmasters in most GBA Fire Emblem games are not super good. Don't get me wrong, a trained Guy or Joshua certainly have their uses, but the later games tend to throw hordes of weak enemies your way, so a moderately strong unit that can wield either hand axes or javelins on enemy phase tends to outperform a sword-locked unit that can only do stuff on player phase. Generics in Fire Emblem 6 on the other hand are incredibly strong, especially the promoted units you face in the endgame of hard mode. And having a really good swordmaster that can sometimes take out such enemies in a single round is a lot more useful than you might think. It's one of the reasons why I rate Rutger a 5-star unit in Binding Blade despite his lack of 2 range. And ask yourself this, if you could have another Rutger come late game, why wouldn't you want that? The fact that Swordmasters in Binding Blade gets a ridiculous 30% crit bonus as opposed to the 15% they get in the later games, means that when you combine their innate crit bonuses with a killing edge and a few supports, it's not uncommon to see their crit rates go up into the high 70s, which makes them really good at eliminating dangerous threats. Speaking of supports, Fear possesses the Fire affinity, which is arguably the best in the game, and she has a myriad of pretty useful supporting partners to choose from. While many people like to debate which one to use between her and Rutger, they actually form quite a potent tag team together, as their Fire/Dark affinities gives them double crit bonuses, which can be quite insane when combined together. Though it is one of the slowest building supports in the game, so be prepared to end your turns a lot if you want to obtain it. Fear's supports with Shin and Noah can help out her survivability quite a bit, as their respective ice and anima affinities provides her with extra avoid, making it very hard for enemies to land hits on her. However, her support with Bartre should not be underestimated either, as his thunder affinity gives her both extra avoid and crit, 2 things she really enjoys. And it's also an incredibly fast support, at least by Binding Blade standards, growing at 3 points per turn. Many players arguably don't like using Bartre in Binding Blade, but I actually think he's a bit of an underrated character in this game, and I'm tempted to make a spotlight on the guy in the future to emphasize this, because I think a lot of people undervalue his massive base 22 strength, which is absolutely incredible, and Fear's Fire affinity really patches up his low points, such as his accuracy. But anyway, this isn't a spotlight on Bartre, I just wanted to point it out. Lastly, Fear's support with Karel, while incredibly fast, is pretty inconsequential, as it is literally only obtainable in the last 3 chapters of the game. And that's really too bad, because the combination of fire and light is pretty kick-ass for Swordmasters, as it gives them 3 extra damage and a bunch of crit, but alas, this support is only here for story purposes. So, to summarize my thoughts on Fear in a closing argument, she is a very interesting unit, but the community tends to be split into 2 very polarizing sides in regards to how they view her. You have the people on one side who says she's this amazingly underrated character and one of the best units in the game, and then you have the other side that calls her absolutely horrible and a useless waste of space because she has bad bases. I actually think both sides are wrong in their own ways. Fear is neither the best unit in the game, nor is she a waste of space. The appeal of Fear is how easy she is to train, and how much that training pays off if you sit through it a little bit in the first few chapters after she joins. I would say that Fear is the perfect unit to use for players trying to beat the Binding Blade on hard mode for their very first time. Such players will need the help of some late game powerhouses to get through some hurdles like the dreaded Chapter 21, not to mention a strong Durandal wielder to eliminate bulky Manakets and Wyvern Lords, and Fear is pretty good for that. that. Rutger does that job equally well, if not better of course, so my recommendation is to use both of them, supported together. They are an absolutely amazing duo. So at the end of the day, I think Fear is a unit that certainly has her niche in Binding Blade, and all the people arguing with each other whether she's the best or the worst unit in the game are missing the bigger picture. So if you are one of those people who think it's fun to level up Fear, then by all means, level up Fear. I think it's incredibly fun to level up Fear, and at the end of the day, that's more important than playing a 20-year-old single-player game optimally. So screw the opinions of others. Train up this deadly little Myrmidon and she'll definitely grow into a master of the sword.
Face my blade!
I think there's an argument to be made that Fear is not a super exciting character, but I feel like her story is executed so well that it doesn't really matter. A good classic will always be enjoyable to watch, even if you've seen it before. It's kinda like how most people perceive vanilla ice cream to be bland, but it's not really. Vanilla ice cream is freaking delicious, especially on a hot summer day, and that's what I think Fear is, vanilla ice cream at its finest. She's of course far from perfect, but by Binding Blade standards, she stands out by a mile. I'm going to rate her a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Fear's in-game portrait is actually one of my favorite ones in all of the GBA games. She just has this incredibly striking look that is extremely memorable. When designing Fear, I think the developers took a lot of inspiration from Larce and Marita from the Drukdraw games. And on a side note, I really love the cipher art, where it looks like Fear has finally been able to fill her mother's shoes. As far as design goes, Fear is a solid 5 out of 5 stars. I really love the way she looks. Alright, so here I think we've arrived at the controversial bits, and I think a large part of the comment section of the spotlight will be centered around debating this very rating. Up until this point, I've been avoiding shitting too much on Fear's basis because I think there's honestly not that much more to say. The argument has been done to death. Yes, we know, Fear has a really bad start, bad basis, yada yada. Also, we know Rutger is infinitely better in every way, we don't need to discuss that either. If I am to rate Fear in the context of someone who is allergic to spending a few extra turns in Chapter 9, then no, she's not very good at all. But I also think that people who say she's completely useless are selling her short as well. When trained, Fear is an incredibly valuable asset to your team that can downright trivialize certain sections of the game, and saying she doesn't deserve to get a few extra bonus points for that would be underselling her immensely. I'm therefore going to rate her a generous 3 out of 5 stars. I actually think she's a bit of an underrated character by objective standards, but I also see the argument for rating her 2 stars. Have fun fighting about this in the comment section below.
Don't you hold back!
Thank you so much for watching this Fire Emblem character spotlight, and thank you to Vain Glory who requested it as his silver tier Patreon reward. I really wish I could get out these Patreon sponsored spotlights faster, but I'm just one guy, so I do apologize to those of you who have been waiting for a while. I hope to get down this long list at some point. Still, if you did enjoy the spotlight, please remember to support it by giving it a like and a comment, and you can also watch more spotlights by clicking the playlist linked in front of you. As always, my name has been Mengs, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye!